A few years ago, one of the most powerful men on Wall Street packed up a hedge fund that manages around $69 billion and quietly moved the entire thing to Miami. He wasn't the first, and he definitely wasn't the last. Right now, billionaire after billionaire is quietly moving to Miami, and most people have no idea just how big this shift really is. So today, we're breaking down exactly why the ultra-wealthy are leaving New York, Chicago, and California for South Florida, the tax game behind it, the neighborhood they're buying up block by block, and what this whole thing quietly tells you about where the smart money moves next. And I want to be clear up front, none of this is a guess. Every number here comes from public filings, real estate records, and reporting anyone can look up. If you appreciate this type of deep dive, gently tap that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this. And let's get into it right now. Let's start with the move that made everyone pay attention. The man is Ken Griffin, and the firm is Citadel. For decades, Citadel was one of the crown jewels of Chicago finance. Then, a few years ago, Griffin announced he was relocating the company's global headquarters to Miami. We're talking about a firm that manages roughly $69 billion, run by a founder who is himself worth nearly $50 billion. Around 400 to 500 Citadel staff came with him. And this was not a small satellite office to test the water. Griffin is building a $2.5 billion headquarters designed by the architect Norman Foster right on Biscayne Bay, plus a separate super tall tower on Brickell Bay Drive that's planned to rise more than 1,000 feet into the skyline. You don't spend that kind of money on a place you're planning to leave. And here's the part that surprised me. Griffin is not some outlier. He's one signal inside a much larger pattern. Over the past few years, roughly 74 companies have moved their headquarters to Florida. The state now has more than 500 money management firms running around $300 billion in assets. Names you'd recognize: Blackstone, Millennium, Thoma Bravo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all have a growing footprint in South Florida. Banco Santander is putting up a 41-story tower in the heart of Brickell. This is not a trickle. This is a migration. And it isn't only hedge funds. The tech world has been quietly doing the same thing. Palantir, a major data company, moved its headquarters to the Miami area. One early mover, Barry Sternlicht, relocated his firm Starwood Capital to Miami Beach long before it was fashionable. And being early is often the whole game. Even culture brands followed the money. Playboy moved its headquarters to Miami Beach, and a global cruise company opened a $100 million headquarters downtown. When finance, tech, and lifestyle brands all start pointing at the same city, that's usually not a coincidence. That's a signal. So the obvious question is, why? And the first answer is the simplest one: money. Specifically, taxes. Florida has no state income tax, no capital gains tax, no estate tax. Now think about who cares most about those three things. It's people who earn enormous incomes, who sell assets for enormous gains, and who plan to pass down enormous fortunes. Let me make that concrete. Picture an executive earning several million dollars a year in New York City. Between state and city taxes, a large slice of that income disappears before it ever reaches the bank. Move that same person to Florida, and that slice, the state and city portion, simply goes away. Multiply it over a decade, and you're talking about the price of a mansion in taxes that never had to be paid. Now scale it up to a billionaire selling a company or an asset for a massive gain. In a high-tax state, the bill can run into the hundreds of millions. In Florida, the state's cut of that gain is zero. That one word, zero, is doing a lot of quiet work in this story. And the pressure got sharper recently. California voters decide this November on a one-time 5% tax on fortunes over $1 billion. New York has leaned harder on its wealthiest residents too. When you tell a billionaire you'd like a slice of their net worth on top of everything they already pay, don't be shocked when the private jet points south. For a top earner leaving a high-tax state, the potential savings can run north of $500,000 a year, every year. And by the way, if a story about where the world's richest people quietly park their money is the kind of thing you find fascinating, drop a comment below and tell me, does this feel like smart strategy to you, or does it rub you the wrong way? I read the comments, and the sharpest ones sometimes turn into their own videos. But taxes alone don't explain the timing. Wealthy people have always disliked taxes, and Florida has always been sunny. So why now? The honest answer is that something broke the old rules. For generations, if you wanted to work in finance, you basically had to be in New York. That's where the deals, the talent, and the prestige lived. Then the world went remote almost overnight, and a lot of powerful people discovered something uncomfortable for New York. The work still got done from a laptop over the ocean. Once that leash was cut, the whole calculation changed. If you can run a multi-billion-dollar firm from a tower in Brickell with better weather and a fraction of the tax bill, then staying put stops feeling like tradition and starts feeling like a choice you have to justify. And all of that money had to land somewhere. It landed in a neighborhood called Brickell. If you've never seen it, picture a dense cluster of glass towers right on the water in downtown Miami. And people have started calling it Wall Street South. The demand has been staggering. Office rents at a building like 830 Brickell reportedly roughly tripled, climbing toward $200 a square foot, which is New York money in a city that used to be a relative bargain. Top-tier office rents across the district jumped around 74% in just a few years. And the housing market tells the same story even louder. Roughly 70% of the priciest home sales, the ones going for over $1,000 a square foot, are being paid for in all cash. That's not a family stretching for a mortgage. That's wealth that already exists, quietly looking for a new home. Now let's talk about the people, because this is where it tips from a business trend into something almost surreal. Just off the coast, there's a tiny, guarded island called Indian Creek. It's often described as one of the most exclusive addresses in America, only a few dozen homes and its own private police force. Jeff Bezos left Seattle after decades and bought into that island, reportedly spending somewhere around $79 million, and then another $68 million on property there. Mark Zuckerberg is reported to have assembled a compound in the same stretch of Miami, worth in the range of $170 million. Add in names tied to the founding of Google and a well-known tech investor who set up in Miami and opened an office in the Wynwood district, and the picture sharpens. This isn't scattered. The same few square miles keep showing up over and over. Quick pause, because this next part is really the whole point. Everything we're looking at, the firms, the towers, the private islands, it's all circling one bigger question. Where does the smart money go next? Miami was the answer for this wave. But there's always a next one. Some people are betting on Austin. Some are betting on Dubai. So here's what I want you to do. Drop a comment and tell me which city you think is next. Austin, Dubai, or somewhere nobody's watching yet. And if you want to keep following how the ultra-wealthy actually move their money, subscribe to Crest Royale, because that is the entire reason this channel exists. Okay, back to it. So here's the deeper mechanic underneath all of this, and it's the part most people miss. Migrations like this don't happen in a straight line. They happen at a tipping point. For years, moving to Miami was a slightly risky, slightly lonely bet. The talent wasn't all there yet. The lawyers, the bankers, the recruiters, the service firms, they were still mostly up north. But every firm that moved made the next move a little easier. Once a critical mass of capital lands in one place, it starts to pull everything else toward it. The talent follows the jobs. The restaurants and the schools and the law firms follow the talent. And suddenly, a place that felt like a gamble becomes the obvious choice. Money, it turns out, has gravity. The more of it that gathers in one spot, the harder it pulls on everything nearby. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I made this sound like a flawless success story, because it isn't. There are real cracks in the foundation. Miami sits on the front line of a warming climate, and insurance costs across Florida have been climbing hard. Florida now has the most expensive home insurance in the country, averaging somewhere around $6,000 to $7,000 a year, and far more than that on the coast. And for a lot of homeowners, coverage has become brutally expensive, or tough to get at all. Hurricanes are not a hypothetical here. The cost of living has spiked for the ordinary people who actually keep the city running, and that creates its own kind of pressure. And for all the momentum, New York still has something Miami hasn't fully copied yet: a century of depth, of institutions, of sheer financial weight stacked up over generations. So the honest read is this: Miami has genuinely become a serious financial center, faster than almost anyone predicted. Whether it truly rivals New York, or simply becomes a very wealthy second home for the industry, is still an open question. And if you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who thinks about this stuff seriously. So do me one favor and share this with the friend you always end up talking money and cities with. They'll have opinions. So let's bring it back to where we started. One man moved a $69 billion firm from Chicago to Miami, and at the time, it looked like a single billionaire's preference. But it was really a signal, an early read on a shift that is still playing out right now. The wealthy didn't move to Miami just for the beaches. They moved because the math changed, the rules changed, and once enough of them moved, the gravity did the rest. So the real question isn't why they went to Miami. It's which city they're quietly looking at next, and whether you'll notice before everyone else does. If you want to go deeper, I broke down the next chapter of this exact story. The unlikely little island the ultra-wealthy are quietly turning into their next Monaco. And you can check that out right here. Thanks for watching Crest Royale.